My sister made me and my husband sit in a secluded arrangement at her engagement party. Because we aren't as rich as her fiance. But her face turns pale when her fiance comes to meet my husband and tells her. My sister Veronica is without a doubt the most two-faced person you will ever meet. On the surface she appears sweet and charming, but when you dig deeper you find a very different reality. I know this firsthand because we grew up together and I've seen her true colors more times than I can count. We grew up in a poor working-class family, and like many children from lower-income households we had to adjust to circumstances that were far from ideal. Compromise was a way of life for us, whether it was sharing a single blanket during freezing winters, going to bed hungry some nights, or learning to be content with second-hand clothes. Our childhood was filled with struggles and sacrifices. And as much as I hated our broken-down house with its leaky roof and creaking floors, I know Veronica despised it just as much. However, our ways of dealing with this shared hardship couldn't have been more different. I chose to channel my frustration and desire for a better life into hard work. I poured everything I had into my studies, determined to escape the cycle of poverty we were trapped in. Despite countless challenges, I earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. Something that felt like a miracle at the time. That scholarship became my ticket to a brighter future. A good education that led to a stable, high-paying job. Once I was well settled in my life, I turned my focus back to my family. It was important to me that our parents, who had sacrificed so much for us, could finally enjoy a more comfortable life. I helped them move out of that dilapidated house and into a better living situation. But Veronica, she took a very different path. While I focused on hard work and self-reliance, she leaned into her looks, charm, and cunning nature. Veronica has always known exactly how to use her beauty and wit to her advantage. Especially when it comes to getting men and using them her whole life. She has constantly jumped from one relationship to the next as if she can't bear the thought of being single for even a moment. Her strategy is simple but effective: find a man who can give her what she wants, whether it's financial stability, luxury items, or a place to live. She has mastered the art of securing it all through relationships. I've never seen her struggle to pay her bills or worry about where her next meal will come from. Because she always has someone taking care of it. For her most recent relationship was with a rapper who not only paid for her bills but also lavished her with expensive shoes and designer clothes, and even gave her a place to stay rent-free. She seemed to have it all in that arrangement, but as with most of her relationships, it ended in chaos. The relationship came crashing down when the rapper caught her cheating on him with one of his house staff. No less, he was understandably furious, and when things fell apart, Veronica did what she always does. She ran to me for help. She showed up at my doorstep, distraught and desperate, asking to stay until things calmed down after her breakup. Despite my frustration and the obvious mess she had created for herself, couldn't turn her away. That's just the kind of relationship we have. She always turns to me in times of trouble, and I, being the elders, always find it hard to say no. She ended up staying at my house for a month, lying low and avoiding the fallout of her latest drama. During that time, my husband made it clear how much he disliked the situation. He's well aware of Veronica's tendencies and has never been a fan of her drama-filled lifestyle. Still, he knows better than to argue with me when it comes to helping my sister. He grits his teeth and puts up with it, knowing I have a soft spot for her despite her endless antics. You would think that after all the times Veronica has come running to me for help, she would at least show a bit of gratitude towards me, but no, that's not who she is. You see, Veronica has always been jealous of me. She seems to harbor this deep-seated resentment towards me. It's as though she can't stand the fact that my life is better than hers. She also hates the fact that I found myself such a good, loyal husband. She's even told me outright that she finds it really unfair that I live such a stable and comfortable life without ever worrying about money. What she doesn't understand is that I work so hard to get where I am. She hates hearing about how my husband takes me on fancy vacations every year, and she never misses an opportunity to remind me that. She thinks I don't deserve any of it. Just for some context, unlike me, my husband comes from a very wealthy family, but you'd never guess it by looking at him. And I met at a conference where he was a guest speaker. At the time, I had no idea how financially successful he was. He looked so simple and humble, which is what attracted me to him. He doesn't flaunt his wealth: no designer suits, no flashy cars, and no expensive watches. He once told me that showing off wasn't his style, and that mindset is part of what made me fall for him. When we started seriously dating, I realized the extent of his wealth. Despite his family wealth, he had also quietly built a fortune for himself through years of smart decisions and hard work. Anyways, even after I married my husband, we've made it a point not to broadcast his wealth to my family. Yes, we moved into a larger house, but we kept most other aspects of our life understated. Apart from helping my parents and occasionally Veronica when they truly need it. We rarely talk about money or make our financial situation obvious. My husband believes in living modestly. And I respect that. It's also partly because I know how someone Veronica would react. She already feels entitled to our help. And if she fully understood the extent of my husband's wealth, she'd likely see us as her personal safety net. So after her relationship with the rapper ended, I assumed Veronica would take some time to reflect and chill, maybe even stay single for a while. But no, in true Veronica fashion, she quickly found herself another man. This time though, things were different, or at least they seemed that way. At first, her new guy James was a senior account manager at his company, someone who had built a solid career and was doing quite well for himself. At first, to be honest, I thought he was just a rebound, someone to fill the gap until her next conquest. But then Veronica surprised all of us by actually getting serious about him. She bragged about his sports car and rich parents all the time. Then one day she invited my parents and me to have lunch with James, where we could officially meet him. During this lunch, she let it slip that her decision to be with James wasn't entirely about love. According to her, James was somewhat rich and very important, and she wanted to secure her future by locking him down. She was very open about the fact that she wanted a part of his wealthy lifestyle. As if that wasn't bad enough, before James arrived at the lunch, Veronica explicitly told us not to mention anything about our poor childhood years, and instructed us to act as though we came from a family with good money and status. She told us that she had lied to James about our background, as she didn't want him to know exactly how poor we used to be. She also forbade us from talking about any of her exes and claimed that she had told James that she had no experience in relationships. I was appalled. Basically, she had lied to James about everything. And she wanted us to keep up the facade just so she could marry this rich boy. I didn't want to lie to James. That guy deserved to know the truth, but Veronica argued that once she was married to him, she would tell him everything. Until then, she insisted it was her decision to make. I hated the situation, but for the sake of keeping the peace, I kept my mouth shut. During the lunch with James, it became clear just how smitten he was with Veronica. Despite only knowing her for 7 even months, he seemed utterly devoted to her. He was polite and respectful towards my parents and me, expressing repeatedly how much he wanted to marry her. My parents, swept up in the moment and likely eager for Veronica to settle down, gave him their blessing right there. And then I felt really bad for the guy, as he didn't deserve to be deceived like this. Not even a week passed before they officially announced their engagement. Yes, you read that right. My relationship hopping sister, the woman who never seemed to stay with one man for long, was planning to get married to this guy. At first, I let myself believe it was a genuine change. Maybe she had grown up, learned from her past, and found real love with James. I was happy for her, truly I was. I even allowed myself a sliver of hope that this could mark a turning point in her life. Veronica seemed over the moon about the whole thing. For once, she appeared genuinely excited to be starting this new chapter in her life. She wasted no time in planning their engagement party, inviting my husband and me to attend. It was meant to be a grand event, and my husband, who hadn't yet met James or had any idea what to expect, was curious to finally meet the man who captured my sister's attention. When we arrived at the party, it was immediately clear exactly why Veronica wanted to marry this guy. James had spared no expense for their engagement party. The venue was beautiful and the event had been meticulously planned. There were professional caterers, servers dressed in formal attire, and even assigned seating at elegant tables adorned with floral centerpieces. It was also polished and extravagant, far more elaborate than I had anticipated. As we entered, I quickly spotted my parents already seated at a table closer to the center of the room. They waved us over enthusiastically, but before we could make our way to them, Veronica intercepted us. She stopped us in our tracks and told us that our assigned table wasn't near our parents. Then, without further explanation, she escorted my husband and me to a table tucked away in a far corner of the room. The table seemed secluded from the rest of the party and noticeably less decorated than the others. She motioned for us to sit and informed us that this was our table for the evening. My husband and I exchanged confused glances. I was taken aback by the whole thing. My husband asked Veronica why we were being seated so far away from our parents and even from her and James with a dismissive tone. She snapped that she only wanted well-to-do people seated near her and James's family. My husband and I exchanged stunned glances. Her reasoning was as insulting as it was nonsensical. We both financially stable, and Veronica knew that perfectly well. But she didn't stop there smoking. She added with a sneer that her fiance's family was richer than anyone she'd ever met, and that since we weren't on their level, she decided we didn't deserve to be anywhere near them. The sheer arrogance and venom in her words left us speechless. But it also made one thing crystal clear: Veronica wanted to humiliate us. Her comment wasn't just insulting, it was cruel. Veronica was basically trying to insinuate that my husband and I were beneath her and her fiance's family when it came to social and financial standing. It felt like she was trying to say we weren't good enough to be seated closer to them, as we didn't measure up to the prestige or wealth that she thought her fiance's family represented. The smirk on her face made it painfully obvious that she was enjoying every second of it. Before I could gather my thoughts to respond, Veronica turned as if to leave, smugly confident that she'd had the last word. But then James appeared. He must have spotted us talking to her and came over to greet us. James greeted me warmly and then turned to my husband. The moment James saw him, his face lit up with surprise. "Wow, it's you, Mr. Hamilton. What are you doing here?" he exclaimed. Visibly excited, it was clear he recognized my husband, and his reaction caught both Veronica and me off guard. She froze, her smirk fading into confusion as James continued, his tone filled with admiration. I glanced at my husband, who seemed calm but slightly amused by the unexpected turn of events. He hadn't met James until that evening, but now he seemed to recognize him. The two men shook hands while my husband told James that he was married to me. James seemed pleasantly surprised by that and started saying how he couldn't believe that he was going to be a family with someone he'd admired for so long. Veronica, on the other hand, looked like she was swallowing a lemon. Whatever connection my husband had with James, it was clearly a significant one. And Veronica had no idea. James then turned to Veronica and casually mentioned that his company had been working under my husband's company for years. In fact, he explained my husband's company was one of their biggest clients, and James and his team personally managed the account. He seemed proud as he explained how often my husband's company used their services, clearly holding my husband in high regard. That was the moment Veronica's face drained of color, and her eyes widened as the realization hit her. Just minutes earlier, she had gone out of her way to demean us, smugly claiming we weren't as rich or important as her fiancé. Now she was confronted with the truth that her very fiancé worked for my husband's company. The vindication I felt at that moment was indescribable. It was like a karmic gift served on a silver platter. My husband remained composed, but I could tell he found the irony of the situation as satisfying as I did. James, seemingly oblivious to the tension, then asked us a straightforward question. "Why are you sitting so far away from the rest of us?" I looked at Veronica, who looked terrified that we were going to expose her. And without missing a beat, I told James the truth. "Well, this is where Veronica wanted us to sit." James looked genuinely taken aback. He turned to Veronica, concern etched on his face, and asked, "Why would you make your own sister and her husband sit all the way over here?" Veronica looked as pale as a ghost. She stumbled over her words, clearly caught off guard. And for once she didn't have a quick comeback. It was as though she was struggling to think of an explanation that wouldn't make her look terrible in front of James. Before Veronica could come up with an excuse, I decided to speak up. I calmly explained to James the reason behind our seating arrangement. I told him how Veronica had mentioned that we were not rich enough to sit near them or the other well-to-do guests. Veronica immediately tried to interrupt, stammering protests. But I continued, recounting everything she had told me and my husband earlier. I didn't exaggerate or sugarcoat, just laid the truth out plainly. James's expression turned from confusion to disbelief and then to mortification. He looked absolutely appalled. As he turned to Veronica, who by now was visibly panicking, "That's totally inappropriate," he told her, his tone sharp with disappointment. Then turning back to us, he began apologizing profusely. "I'll fix this right now. Let me have you move to a better table near us." While I appreciated his apology, my husband had already made up his mind. He is not one to let insults slide easily, especially when they're as deliberate and hurtful as this. Without hesitation, he announced that we wouldn't be staying any longer. "I appreciate the gesture, James," my husband said politely, "but we are leaving." I nodded in agreement, ready to go. James looked flustered and tried to reason with my husband. But it was no use. Veronica too began apologizing frantically, insisting it was a misunderstanding and begging us to stay, but the damage was done. What was the point of staying after what Veronica had done? Sure, she seemed apologetic now, but would she have felt any guilt if James hadn't turned out to work for my husband? I doubted it. My husband and I quietly excused ourselves and left the party instead of dwelling on the negativity. We decided to turn the evening into something positive. We went to our favorite restaurant for an impromptu date night. Just the two of us. It was refreshing to leave behind the drama and spend quality time together, enjoying good food and each other's company. My husband remains furious about the incident and has made it clear he wants to cut ties with my sister entirely. I can't say I blame him. Veronica's behavior was deeply disrespectful not just to him but to me as well. At this point I agree with my husband, family or not, there's only so much one can tolerate. And Veronica has crossed that line. Since the party my phone has been ringing non-stop. It feels like everyone suddenly has an opinion about what happened. Without even knowing the full story, my parents along with some relatives who were present seemed particularly upset. They only saw my husband and me leaving the engagement party abruptly with no explanation provided. Instead of questioning Veronica or digging deeper into what might have led to our departure, they've decided to place the blame squarely on us. They've been calling us rude and disrespectful, berating us for walking out on such an important event. It's frustrating to say the least. Meanwhile, Veronica has been bombarding me with text. Her tone is completely different now. She's sending what feels like endless apologies, claiming she regrets what happened at the party, and is begging me to call her back as soon as possible. Apparently James is furious with her and they've had a big fight over the incident. He's insisting that she make things right with us, which I suppose is why she's suddenly so remorseful. Update 1. Thank you for the hundreds of comments I've received from everyone. I agree with most of your comments. That my sister needs to be taught a lesson in humility. If I accept her apology, she will never learn her lesson. She's only apologizing now because she's afraid of losing James, not because she's actually sorry for the way she treated me and my husband. This isn't about reconciliation for the sake of family, it's about her trying to save face before her fiancé turns his back on her and ends their relationship. Also, I agree with some of the comments that James deserves to know the full truth about my sister and her true behavior before he makes any deeper commitments. It's important that he understands what kind of person she is, especially if she's planning to spend the rest of her life with him. And while I'm not one to meddle in their personal life, I can't stand by and let her manipulate everyone around her, especially when she's hurt me so deeply. My husband and I have decided to take matters into our own hands. We've invited James to our place for lunch. He has actually been reaching out to my husband, apologizing profusely for the situation. So we think sitting down and having a face-to-face conversation about this will be better. I feel like it's time for him to hear the whole truth, not just the version Veronica has been feeding him Earlier this week I also took the time to speak with my parents about everything that went down at the engagement party. I explained the whole situation in detail, making sure they humiliated us. They were horrified when they heard the full story. And I could tell it really shook them to realize how their daughter had treated me and my husband. My parents, especially my mother, were deeply regretful for judging us before knowing the whole story, and they immediately apologized to me. Since then my parents have assured me that they are going to set the record straight with the rest of the family. They want to make sure that no one else, especially relatives who might not have witnessed the event firsthand, blames me for what happened. They understand now that the problem wasn't me, it was Veronica's behavior. My parents have promised to talk to the rest of the family to clear up any misunderstandings. I appreciate their support. Sorry for such a late update. James came over to our place this week. He apologized again for how Veronica had treated us at the engagement party, acknowledging how wrong it was for her to try and humiliate us. He told us that he wouldn't have never let her go through with this if he had an idea that she was going to treat us this way. James pleaded with my husband, asking him not to bring this up to his boss as it could seriously jeopardize his career. My husband reassured James that despite how my sister had insulted us, their business partnership would remain unaffected. James seemed visibly relieved by that, and I appreciated my husband's calmness in the midst of all this drama. It was important to him that business didn't get entangled in his personal mess, and I respected that. Once that was settled, I took it upon myself to be completely transparent with James about who my sister really was. I didn't want to meddle in his relationship, but I felt he had every right to know the truth about Veronica's past. He needed to understand what kind of person she was before making any long-term commitments. I told him everything: how she had been in and out of prisons, how she had a string of shady exes, how she has never had a job, and how she constantly came to us for money, often without any real intention of changing her ways. I wasn't trying to break them up or create conflict, but I wasn't going to sit back and watch James make a decision based on an incomplete picture of who Veronica truly was. I made sure to add that I was happy for him to be a part of our family, but I wanted to make sure he knew what he was getting into. Veronica may have been charming in the beginning, but she had a pattern of using people and then tossing them aside when they no longer served her purpose. James listened carefully, and while he seemed shocked by some of what I said, he didn't react with anger or defensiveness. He told me that he had no idea about her past or about our family background, since Veronica had made such elaborate lies. In the end, he informed me that he was going to take some space from Veronica to process everything I had shared with him. He didn't want to rush into anything, and I could tell he was trying to make sense of what was going on. It was clear that he had a lot to think about at the moment. I feel relieved that I did my part by being honest to James. Ultimately, I hope he makes the right choice both for his own sake and for the sake of everyone involved. Just hours after James left our place, my phone rang. It was my sister, and she was obviously screaming at me. I could barely make sense of what she was saying through her angry sobs and shouts. But it quickly became clear that James had called off their engagement. Apparently, he had called her to confront her about some of the lies she had told him. But instead of owning up to them, she refused to take any responsibility and just doubled down on her falsehoods. He also told her that she didn't know how to conduct herself in public. And that she wasn't mature enough to be his wife. When she tried to argue, he shut her down, telling her that he couldn't marry her because she had lied to him too many times. He was finished and made it crystal clear that he no longer saw a future with her. My sister was furious, yelling at me that I was the reason she lost him. She went on and on about how James was her golden ticket to a better life. A life of higher status and wealth, and that marrying him would have changed her life and given her everything she ever wanted. She said I ruined her chance of getting a good life. I wasn't surprised by her reaction. As usual, she blames everyone else other than herself for how her life turns out. This time I wasn't going to let her manipulate me or use me to get what she wanted any longer. I calmly but firmly told her that I didn't care how much she yelled at me anymore because I was done with her. I told her that my husband and I were cutting her off. No more helping her, no more handouts, no more bailing her out of whatever mess she created. This time she had gone too far, and I wasn't going to tolerate it anymore. When I said that, there was an immediate silence on the other end of the line. She had nothing to say in response, and I could hear the shock in her silence. It was like I had finally said the thing that she knew was coming but never expected to actually hear. I could almost feel her panic through the phone. I told her that for years I had let her disrespect slide because I knew deep down that she was jealous of me. I knew she was trying to tear me down, but I always let it go because in a way I understood why she felt that way. She was my younger sister and I wanted to look out for her, but this time she had crossed the line. She had humiliated us, she had humiliated my husband, and I couldn't let her get away with it. My husband had been nothing but kind to her, even though he didn't particularly like her. And he had always supported her whenever she needed something. He had done all of that because he loved me, and she had completely taken advantage of that. I told my sister in no uncertain terms that she didn't deserve people like us in her life anymore. I made it clear that if she ever showed up at our door asking for help again, we wouldn't even acknowledge her presence. She was completely on her own from here on out. Her reaction was exactly what I expected. She tried to argue, pulling the "I'm still your family" card, trying to guilt trip me into backing down. She argued how she didn't really mean those insulting words, and that we could just forget about the whole thing and start all over again. Since now James and her are done, but I wasn't going to fall for it. I scoffed and told her I was done and hung up the phone. It was time to end the cycle. Since that call, both my husband and I have blocked her from our phones, social media, and everything. We've also made it clear to my parents and other relatives that we don't want any of them reaching out to us to change our minds about my sister. If they do, they'll be cut off as well. There are no more second chances, no more excuses for her behavior. Veronica is no longer a part of our lives, and I'm at peace with that. It's sad that it had to come to this, but sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life, even if they family. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe for more video like this.